Smooth muscle. Smooth muscle fibers are different than skeletal muscle fibers. Smooth muscle fibers are much shorter and they're spindle shaped. When we say spindle shaped, we mean that they're tapered on both ends and larger in the middle. Because they're a shorter, smaller cell, they have one single nucleus. They have endomysium wrapping around each fiber, but the muscle lacks the other connective tissue covers. So there's no paramysium, which means there's no fascicles, and there's no epimysium. There's no sarcomeres or striations, but there is still actin and myosin myofilaments, but they're arranged diagonally, not longitudinally. And because they're arranged diagonally, it will allow a different kind of contraction than we saw with skeletal muscle fibers. There are also dense bodies. The dense bodies anchor the myofilaments so that they stay in place. They're very similar to what the Z lines were when we were talking about skeletal muscle fibers and sarcomeres. Function of smooth muscle fibers, they are under involuntary control. So your nervous system controls those without a voluntary message from you. They still follow the sliding filament model. So the actin and the myosin myofilaments will still slide, but because of the diagonal arrangement of the myofilaments, the shortening will occur in all directions, not just lengthwise like we saw with skeletal muscle. And so contraction ends up being more like a corkscrew sort of a contraction. Smooth muscle fibers have slow synchronized contractions. They have very low energy requirements and they're resistant to fatigue. So they're not going to tire as easily. They're not going to need a resting period. There's different kinds of smooth muscle, and one type is called single unit smooth muscle. This is also called visceral smooth muscle. It's found in the uterus, gastrointestinal tract, bladder, and with single unit smooth muscle, the neural connection is to one single pacemaker cell. That pacemaker cell then passes the action potential to the whole muscle, allowing it to work as a unit. And so it results in an all or nothing type of contraction. So when you think of single unit, think of stimulation of a single cell, and it's going to cause the entire muscle to work as a single unit. Peristalsis is the result of single unit smooth muscle. With peristalsis, the cells are actually arranged in layers. There's a longitudinal layer, and then there's a circular layer. And alternating contractions between the different layers will allow substances to be pushed or moved through hollow organs. So here you can see an example of peristalsis on the left. Notice how slow those contractions are taking place. And it's like a wave, where if there was something in that tube, it would be pushed as the muscle contractions are going. Over on the right, this is intestinal peristalsis. So you can see the peristalsis moving things in the intestines. You can see how there are alternating contractions that are pushing things along. The other kind of smooth muscle is multi-unit smooth muscle. And this is when the neural connection is to individual cells. This allows fine control and graded responses. And this is found in the airway, in the vasculature, in the erector pili of the skin, and the iris of the eyes. So when you think of multi-unit, think of multiple cells are going to have stimulation, which is going to allow the muscle to do things in different degrees. Here's a comparison between multi-unit and single unit smooth muscle and their stimulation. So you can see with multi-unit, each of those individual cells are getting their own stimulation, which means they can contract and relax independent of each other. Where with the single unit, the gap junctions are going to permit coordinated contraction because that pacemaker cell that's getting the signal will then spread that to all of the cells and cause it to work as one functional unit. Finally, some developmental aspects about the muscular system. Cardiac and skeletal muscle fibers, once developed, become amitotic, which means they don't divide. They can lengthen and they can thicken, but they're not going to divide and create more muscle cells. What we have is what we have. There's varying regenerative ability as well. Cardiac cells have nearly no regenerative ability. You damage cardiac cells and they're pretty much gone. Skeletal cells have low regenerative ability, so there is a degree to which they can heal and regenerate, but it's a very slow process if it does occur. Smooth muscle, on the other hand, has a very good regenerative ability. So it's able to go through mitosis, create new cells, and also repair damaged cells. Muscle control. We develop muscle control throughout our childhood. It will peak in mid-adolescence. And then actually after mid-adolescence, it is a slow decline. However, athletics and training can improve our muscle control. So even though as you age, your muscle control may not be as much as it used to be when you were younger, through athletics and through training, you can always improve that. Men versus women, the body strength per unit of muscle is the same. So female muscle and male muscle have the ability to do the same things. But men on average tend to have greater strength than females. And that's just due to overall, in general, men have more muscle mass compared to women. Men, on average, have about 42% body mass made of muscle, where women, on average, only have about 36%. And so, because of that extra mass of muscle, that can contribute to greater strength. And in general, that greater muscle mass in men is due to testosterone. Testosterone levels, an increase in testosterone levels can cause the development of more muscle mass. Sarcopenia is an age-related loss of skeletal muscle mass and strength. What ends up happening is that muscle proteins, those myofilaments, the actin, the myosin, the titin, start to degrade. And the number of muscle fibers decrease. So cells start to die or get replaced by connective tissue. This begins at about age 30. So we start losing muscle mass at a relatively young age. And by age 80, 50% of our muscle mass can be lost. And that's just a natural effect of aging. It can be slowed or even reversed by regular exercise. So that's why it's important throughout our life that we continue to exercise, we continue to use our muscles to try to prevent as much of this age-related degeneration as possible.